This coming Monday, of course, is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And this Monday morning, Diane and I will be joining dozens of other members of the Houston Jewish community to march in the 44th anniversary of the Houston MLK Jr. Parade and Celebration. In honor of this special weekend, I thought it would be appropriate to remind ourselves of one of the most powerful moments in Dr. King's life and legacy. On August 28, 1963, 250,000 Americans gathered in Washington, D.C., in front of the Lincoln Memorial, in what became the cornerstone, the inspiration, and the apotheosis of the Civil Rights Movement. It was officially called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The atmosphere at this event was electrifying. One speaker after another fired up the crowd. Powerful folk singers like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Peter, Paul, and Mary, and black spiritual singers like Mahalia Jackson and Odetta inspired the throngs of people with inspirational and energizing lyrics and words. Religion played an essential role in this event. The largest part of the black civil rights movement was motivated by and organized by black ministers. Martin Luther King Jr. himself was, of course, not only an outstanding orator, but he was also in his profession and in his very essence, a Baptist minister. Among the other speakers at the march was Catholic Archbishop Patrick O'Boyle of Washington, who delivered an invocation, and Rabbi Uri Miller, who offered a prayer. There was also another rabbi who spoke, Rabbi Joachim Prinz. Before I tell you a little about Rabbi Prinz and his speech on that day, I want to spend a moment with you and let's imagine together that we are at this dramatic scene. Imagine that we are there on Capitol Mall among 250,000 Americans. Some people estimate about 20% of the people there were white, and a disproportionate number of those white Americans were Jews. We're all energized by the proceedings and just the sheer number of people who are there. The entire event has been extraordinarily well planned. There's no violence, no mention of violence in any of the speeches. We're all there for a purpose: to end segregation and discrimination in the country that we love, to demand freedom and dignity for each and every American citizen, to promote justice and equality for all, to replace hatred, fear, and bigotry with love, compassion, and understanding. When I imagine that scene, I also imagine a parallel scene described in the Torah. Okay, I'm a rabbi, so maybe it's my own wild rabbinic imagination. But you know, the black experience in America parallels in many ways our own people's history. And because they read the same Bible that we do, it's their Bible too, they also see it. The exodus from Egyptian slavery that we read about this morning is more than a Bible story for them. But the image that I see that parallels the March on Washington is the scene at Mount Sinai that we're going to read in next week's Torah portion. The drama of the thunder and lightning, the awesome anticipation that something unique is about to happen, the thrill of staring up and hearing the voice of Moses proclaiming God's laws. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech is one of a handful of speeches that are the most well-known, most powerful, most inspiring, and most emotional speeches in history. King's opening words were 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. With these few words, he immediately captured the symbolism of the location of the march at the Lincoln Memorial, and at the same time referenced another one of America's top few speeches, President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which began 77 years ago, which was delivered almost exactly 100 years before King's speech. King then uses a brilliant metaphor to capture the oppression, the disillusionment, and the urgency that African Americans felt 100 years after they were supposed to have been emancipated, and nearly 190 years after the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence. That manifesto of our country proclaimed, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Those noble ideals had clearly not been applied to African Americans when they were written. And now, 100 years after a civil war was fought, in order to make them universal, they had still not been fully realized. The metaphor that King used to describe this unfulfilled promise is that of a bounced check. America had written a promissory note, and African Americans had come to Washington to cash it in. But instead, they received the check marked insufficient funds. And it was now time for America to keep its promise. And finally, of course, the part of King's speech that is unforgettable was his dream. A dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. That one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at a table of brotherhood. A dream that King's 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The speech was quite simply brilliant. It was awe-inspiring, and I really believe, it was truly divinely inspired. The whole thing was magnificent, and with modern technology, you can read it any time, and we should all read it this weekend. It's very easy to find on the internet. So I won't even try to re-present it this morning because I'd fail miserably by comparison to King himself. Instead, I want to mention another speech. This other speech is all but forgotten, but it was delivered right before Martin Luther King's. It was the speech of a rabbi named Joachim Prinz. Prinz was from Germany. He studied at the Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau, but he was forced to leave Germany in the summer of 1937 by the Nazis. Prinz was an avid Zionist, and when he came to America that summer, he immediately identified with the African Americans who were discriminated against here. He reached out to Martin Luther King in 1950 and asked King to speak at the American Jewish Congress Convention in Miami, because Prinz was the president of that organization at the time. Later, he invited King to speak at his own congregation in New Jersey. So although Abraham Joshua Heschel was famously known for marching with King from Selma to Montgomery in 1965, it was not Heschel, but Prinz, who was chosen to speak at the March on Washington 2 years earlier. So it was that after Mahalia Jackson had pumped up the crowd with a classic gospel song, "I've been buked and I've been scorned," Rabbi Joachim Prinz took the podium and gave this speech. "I speak to you as an American Jew," he said. "As Americans, we share the profound concern of millions of people about the shame and disgrace of inequality and injustice, which makes a mockery of the great American idea. As Jews, we bring to this great demonstration, in which thousands of us proudly participate, a twofold experience, one of spirit and one of history." Rabbi Prinz explained that the Jewish spirit, the Jewish tradition, teaches that God created one human being to teach us that we're all related to each other. We're all family. No one is born more important than anyone else. And we have a responsibility to each other and to preserve human dignity and integrity. Moreover, Jewish history teaches us the cruelty of slavery, the yearning for freedom, and the injustice of being locked in the ghettos of Europe. It is for these reasons, Rabbi Prinz argued, that it is not merely sympathy and compassion for the black people of America that motivates us. It is above all and beyond all such sympathies and emotions, a sense of complete identification and solidarity born of our own painful historic experience. Finally, Prinz referred to his experience as a rabbi in Nazi Germany, from which he said he learned many things, the most important of which is that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problem. The most urgent problem, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, the most tragic problem is silence. The Germans, Prinz said, were a great people which had created a great civilization, but they had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder. America must not become a nation of onlookers, Prinz admonished. America must not remain silent. Not merely black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act, from the president down to the humblest of us, and not for the sake of the Negro, not for the sake of the black community, but for the sake of the image, the idea, and the aspiration of America itself. That was nearly 60 years ago. America has dramatically changed over the past 60 years, thanks to those who organized and demonstrated and persistently worked to improve our country. But we all know that there is more that can be done to banish forever the hatred and bigotry, the prejudice and discrimination, the inequality and unfairness that still persists in our country. There is more that we can do to promote justice and compassion, understanding and respect for people of all races, all faiths, all genders, all orientations and ethnicities. As we commemorate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. this weekend, let us work toward realizing his dream to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood, to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, and to stand up for freedom together. Let's heed the advice of Rabbi Prinz and not be a nation of silent onlookers that remains silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality. Then we can finally cash that check written by the founding fathers, promising the vision of a nation which recognizes that each and every human being is created equal and therefore should be afforded equal opportunities under the law. The promise of a nation which recognizes that each of us is endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is time for all of us to work together to make good on that promissory note and create that nation for us and for our children and for our children's children. Shabbat Shalom.